Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Matt never imagined that the truth would come crashing down on him so violently, so mercilessly, that it would leave him standing in the middle of his penthouse living room unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to recognize the man staring back at him in the mirror anymore. Because the life he believed he was building with Sienna had been nothing more than a carefully scripted illusion, one she had rehearsed flawlessly while loving another man behind his back, Noah Newman, and the moment the pieces finally snapped together, Matt's world didn't just crack, it completely imploded, starting with the look on Sienna's face when he said Noah's name out loud, slow and deliberate, watching the color drain from her cheeks as realization dawned that the lie she had been living was finally exposed, that the secrets she buried so deeply had clawed their way back to the surface, dragging everything she thought she controlled along with them, and Matt could barely recognize his own voice as he demanded the truth, not as a plea but as a reckoning, because deep down he already knew, he had known for weeks, maybe months, but denial had been easier than confronting the reality that the woman he loved had been emotionally tethered to another man the entire time, a man whose name echoed through the Newman legacy like thunder, a man who represented everything Matt feared he would never be able to compete with, and Sienna tried to speak, tried to explain, but the words tangled in her throat. Because how do you justify loving someone else while promising loyalty to a man who trusted you completely? How do you explain that every smile, every whispered "I love you," every night spent pretending to belong to Matt had been layered with guilt and longing for Noah, and when Matt finally snapped, slamming his fist against the marble counter and roaring that she had been lying to his face since the beginning, the truth spilled out in sobs and shattered confessions as Sienna admitted that she never meant for it to go this far, that Noah was supposed to be the past, the one she couldn't let go of emotionally even when circumstances forced them apart, but feelings don't vanish on command, and every time she looked at Matt she saw safety, stability, a future that made sense on paper, while Noah represented passion, history, and the kind of love that never truly dies, and hearing those words was like watching his heart being dissected piece by piece as Matt realized he had never been the one she loved most, only the one she settled for, and that revelation broke something primal inside him, something dark and uncontrollable, because for a man like Matt, who thrives on power, control and certainty, being the second choice was a humiliation he couldn't stomach, and as Sienna collapsed into tears, begging him to understand, begging him to believe that she cared, Matt laughed, a hollow, broken sound that echoed through the room as he told her love built on lies was no love at all, that she hadn't just betrayed him emotionally but strategically, because every move she made, every alliance she formed, every secret she kept now came into question, and suddenly the past made sense, the guarded phone calls, the late-night disappearances, the way she stiffened every time Noah's name came up, the tension Matt had dismissed as coincidence now screamed the truth he refused to see. And when he asked the question that haunted him most, whether she had ever stopped loving Noah, Sienna's silence was the loudest answer of all, sealing Matt's devastation and igniting a fury that threatened to consume not just their relationship but everyone connected to it. Because this wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a power shift, a destabilizing force that rippled outward toward the Newman family, toward Victor, toward Nick, toward Sharon, because Noah Newman was never just another man, he was a symbol. And Matt understood all too well that being entangled in Newman business meant collateral damage was inevitable, and as he ordered Sienna to leave, his voice ice-cold and final, she realized too late that she had underestimated the consequences of playing both sides, that Matt was not a man who absorbed betrayal quietly, and as she walked out with her world crumbling behind her, Matt stood alone, replaying every memory with fresh eyes, recognizing manipulation where he once saw affection, deception where he once saw devotion, and the humiliation burned so deeply that it transformed into resolve because Matt doesn't fall apart. He recalibrates, and as the reality settled in that Sienna truly loved Noah, that she had always loved Noah, his grief twisted into obsession, a need to reclaim control by any means necessary, and somewhere across town, Noah felt an inexplicable chill, unaware that his name had become the catalyst for Matt's undoing and his wrath. Unaware that the truth he shared with Sienna in quiet, stolen moments had detonated a bomb that would soon explode across Genoa City, threatening relationships, alliances, and lives, because Matt's heartbreak wasn't just the end of a love story. It was the beginning of a war, one fueled by betrayal, jealousy, and a man who had nothing left to lose, And as the episode faded out on Matt standing in the shadows, his eyes dark with purpose, one thing became chillingly clear. Discovering Sienna's love for Noah didn't just shatter Matt's world. It rewrote it, and Genoa City would never be the same again. Matt remained frozen long after Sienna disappeared through the elevator doors, the silence of the penthouse pressing down on him like a physical weight. Because now that the truth had been dragged into the light, there was no distraction left to soften the blow, no carefully constructed lie to lean on, only the raw understanding that the woman he had trusted more than anyone else had been emotionally bonded to Noah Newman the entire time. And as memories replayed in ruthless clarity, Matt realized that the signs had always been there, woven subtly into their shared history. The way Sienna's eyes softened when Noah's name surfaced in conversation, the way she deflected questions about her past with a smile too rehearsed to be genuine, the way she insisted that Genoa City was merely a stepping stone rather than the emotional minefield it truly was for her. And suddenly the realization struck with brutal force that every choice she made had been calculated not around Matt, but around the possibility, however distant, that Noah might someday re-enter her life, and that understanding hollowed him out from the inside, turning love into something unrecognizable, something corrosive, and he found himself pacing the room like a caged animal, replaying the confrontation again and again, wishing she had denied it, wishing she had lied just once more so he could cling to the illusion. But Sienna's silence when he asked if she still loved Noah had told him everything he needed to know, and that silence screamed louder than any confession ever could, because it meant that despite everything he had given her, his loyalty, his protection, his future, he had never truly been her choice, only her refuge. And for a man like Matt, who built his identity on being indispensable, that truth was unforgivable. And as anger began to eclipse grief, his thoughts drifted inexorably toward Noah himself, not with immediate hatred, but with a simmering resentment rooted in comparison. Because Noah Newman didn't even have to try. He carried a legacy, a name that opened doors and inspired loyalty without effort, and Matt had spent his entire life fighting to carve out power from nothing, only to be undone by a man who represented everything he despised about inherited privilege. And yet, beneath the bitterness, Matt couldn't ignore the sting of jealousy, because Noah had what Matt never truly did: Sienna's heart. And that realization transformed Matt's sorrow into strategy. Because heartbreak might weaken lesser men, but Matt had survived worse, and if Sienna thought walking away would end this, she was dangerously mistaken, because secrets once exposed had consequences, and Matt knew things about Sienna's past, about the compromises she made, about the lies she told others long before she ever lied to him. And as he poured himself a drink he barely tasted, Matt began mapping out the damage, realizing that if Sienna had been lying to him about Noah, then she had likely been lying to everyone, including herself, and that meant the image she presented to Genoa City was vulnerable, fragile, and ripe for collapse. While across town Sienna stumbled into the night air, her chest tight with panic as the weight of what she had lost finally hit her, because for all her rationalizations, she had never truly imagined a world without Matt's protection, his unwavering belief in her. And now that safety net was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that Matt's silence was far more dangerous than his anger. And as she replayed his final words, cold, controlled, final, she understood that she had crossed a line she could never uncross, because Matt didn't forgive betrayal, he weaponized it. And while she clutched her phone, desperate to call Noah but paralyzed by fear of dragging him into the fallout, Noah himself sat unaware of the storm he had unknowingly triggered, sensing only an unshakable unease as memories of Sienna resurfaced. Memories he had tried to bury under responsibility, distance, and time. And when Sharon noticed his distraction, her maternal instincts flared, because she knew that look, the look of a man haunted by unfinished business. And as she gently pressed him to talk, Noah deflected, unwilling to admit that despite everything, a part of his heart had never let Sienna go, and that unresolved bond now pulsed like an open wound. While elsewhere Victor Newman received word, fragmented, vague, but alarming, that Matt was spiraling, that something had gone catastrophically wrong, and Victor's instincts sharpened immediately, because chaos involving Matt was never contained, it always spread, and if Noah was somehow at the center of it, then the Newman family was already in danger whether they realized it or not. And as Victor ordered quiet inquiries into Matt's recent movements and alliances, Matt himself made his first move, subtle but deliberate, reaching out to old contacts, people who owed him favors, people who understood discretion, because before he confronted Noah directly, Before he exposed Sienna publicly, he needed leverage, something undeniable, something that would strip away any sympathy she might receive. And as he reviewed files and messages, a grim satisfaction settled in his chest, because betrayal had sharpened his focus, and for the first time since Sienna walked out, he felt a sense of control returning, while Sienna, desperate and unraveling, finally gave in and called Noah, her voice trembling as she asked to meet, and Noah hesitated only briefly before agreeing, unaware that Matt had already anticipated this exact move, because when two people share unfinished love, gravity always pulls them back together, and as Noah arrived at the quiet cafe where Sienna waited, their reunion was heavy with unspoken emotion, regret, and longing, and when Sienna confessed that Matt knew everything, that the truth had come out and that Matt was no longer the man she thought she knew, fear flickered across Noah's face, because he understood power dynamics all too well, and Matt was not a man to underestimate, and as Noah urged Sienna to be careful, to protect herself, to tell him everything Matt knew, neither of them realized they were already being watched, because Matt's people were efficient, invisible, and loyal, and within minutes Matt received confirmation that Noah and Sienna were together, the final proof he needed to justify what came next. And as he stared at the photo sent to his phone, a grainy image of two people leaning toward each other, bound by shared history, something inside him hardened permanently, because now the betrayal was no longer theoretical, it was tangible, undeniable, and as Matt closed his eyes, he made a decision that would change everything, not just for himself but for Noah, Sienna, and the entire Newman orbit, because exposing the truth was no longer enough. He wanted accountability, consequences, and above all, control. And as the night deepened over Genoa City, alliances quietly shifted, secrets sharpened into weapons, and the fallout from Sienna's confession began its irreversible march toward destruction, because love built on lies always collapses, but in this case, it threatened to take everyone down with it, and Matt, standing at the center of the storm he now fully embraced, no longer mourned what he had lost. He prepared for what he was about to take. By the time dawn crept over Genoa City, Matt had already transformed heartbreak into momentum, because sleep never came to men who were plotting their next move, and as the city stirred beneath him he stood at the window of his penthouse, watching the streets like a general surveying a battlefield, understanding with brutal clarity that love had never been the real currency of power, information was, leverage was, timing was, and now that Sienna's deception had stripped away his emotional blinders, he could finally see the board as it truly was, with Noah Newman positioned unknowingly at the center of a web he never intended to spin, and that irony almost made Matt smile, because Noah had always been the reluctant player, the moral compass in a family built on ambition and warfare, and it was precisely that goodness, real or perceived, that made him vulnerable, because men like Victor respected strength and strategy, but men like Noah were guided by conscience, and conscience could be exploited. And as Matt reviewed the compiled intel his people had gathered overnight, financial anomalies tied to Sienna's past, a series of favors she had accepted and never repaid, quiet transactions that could be framed as impropriety if presented the right way, he realized that exposing Sienna outright would be too simple, too clean, because the real damage would come from forcing Noah to choose, from backing him into a corner where every option carried a cost. And so Matt began, laying the groundwork with surgical precision, initiating conversations that appeared innocent on the surface but were designed to ripple outward, whispers placed in the right ears, hints of scandal dropped where curiosity thrived, because Genoa City didn't need proof to start talking, it only needed a spark. And while Matt moved invisibly through the morning making calls that would destabilize reputations by nightfall, Noah woke with the lingering unease of a man who sensed the ground shifting beneath his feet, and when Sharon asked again if something was wrong, her voice soft but insistent, Noah finally cracked just enough to admit that Sienna was back in his life in ways he hadn't expected, that her relationship with Matt had ended explosively, and that he feared being the reason. And Sharon listened carefully, because she had lived long enough to know that love rarely arrived without consequences, especially in Genoa City, and as she warned Noah to tread carefully, to protect himself and the people he loved, Noah nodded, but his thoughts were already elsewhere, tangled in memories of Sienna that refused to fade, memories that now carried the weight of guilt, because no matter how he justified it, he couldn't deny that some part of him had hoped Matt would never find out, and that hope now felt like cowardice. While across town Victor Newman absorbed the latest report with narrowed eyes, because Matt's name had begun circulating in uncomfortable proximity to Noah's. and Victor's instincts screamed that this was not coincidence. And as he summoned Nick to discuss what he knew, the generational divide within the Newman family resurfaced sharply, with Nick urging caution and transparency while Victor favored preemptive control, because Victor understood something Nick did not, that men like Matt didn't lash out randomly, they orchestrated, and by the time you realized you were under attack, the damage was already done. And as Victor instructed his team to monitor Matt closely, Matt himself made the bold decision to step into the light, requesting a private meeting with Victor under the guise of mutual concern, knowing full well that Victor would never refuse a conversation that promised insight into a potential threat. And when the two men finally faced each other in Victor's office, the tension was immediate and electric, because both recognized the other as a force to be reckoned with. And as Matt spoke calmly about betrayal, loyalty, and the dangers of underestimating emotional entanglements, Victor listened without interruption, understanding that every word carried subtext. And when Matt finally mentioned Noah, not accusingly but carefully, almost sympathetically, Victor's expression hardened, because now the pieces aligned, and while Victor didn't yet know the full extent of Matt's intentions, he knew enough to realize that this situation required containment, not confrontation. But Matt hadn't come seeking permission, he had come to draw a line, to signal that the truth was already in motion. And as he left Victor's office with a polite nod, Victor knew the storm was closer than he had hoped, and that Noah was dangerously exposed, while Sienna, increasingly isolated, felt the walls closing in as whispers followed her through every room she entered, glances lingering a second too long, conversations stopping abruptly when she appeared, and it didn't take long for her to realize that Matt was working behind the scenes, dismantling her credibility piece by piece, and panic set in as she understood that running wouldn't save her, silence wouldn't protect her, and confronting Matt directly would only escalate the damage, leaving her with one terrifying option: tell Noah everything, not just about her feelings but about her past, her compromises, her mistakes, the things Matt now held over her. And when she finally did, her confession shattered the fragile calm Noah had been clinging to, because the woman he loved was more entangled than he ever imagined, and suddenly his desire to protect her collided with his responsibility to his family, and that internal conflict tore at him relentlessly, because loving Sienna now meant risking everything he had worked to build. And as he wrestled with that truth, Matt watched from a distance, satisfied not with cruelty but with inevitability, because this was always how it would end, with choices forced and masks stripped away. And when the first public accusation surfaced, subtle, ambiguous but damaging, Noah knew there was no turning back, because his name was now linked to a scandal he didn't create but could no longer escape. And as Nick confronted him demanding answers, the fracture within the Newman family widened, old resentments resurfacing as blame and fear intertwined. And while Victor attempted to hold the line, to contain the fallout, Matt escalated, releasing just enough information to keep the pressure building without revealing his full hand, because anticipation was a weapon too. And as Genoa City buzzed with speculation, alliances shifted rapidly, with some distancing themselves from Noah out of self-preservation while others closed ranks defensively. And through it all, Matt remained eerily composed, his pain now fully transmuted into purpose, because this was no longer about Sienna's love for Noah. It was about restoring balance, reclaiming dignity, and proving that betrayal carried consequences no one could outrun. And as the episode drew to a close with Noah standing alone, staring at his phone filled with missed calls and unanswered questions, one truth loomed larger than all the rest. Matt had set events in motion that could not be undone, and the cost of Sienna's lies was about to be paid not just by her, but by everyone she had ever loved. Matt didn't need to say another word as the dominoes continued to fall, because by now the damage was self-sustaining, and that knowledge gave him a chilling sense of calm as he watched the Newman family struggle to contain a scandal that refused to stay buried, while Noah, trapped between love and loyalty, finally understood that silence was no longer an option. And as he prepared to face Victor, Nick, and Sharon with the full truth, Sienna realized too late that her attempt to protect everyone had only ensured their destruction, because lies never shrink with time. They grow, and the longer they live, the more they consume. And as Genoa City braced for the next revelation, Matt stood ready, not as a man scorned, but as a man reborn through betrayal, fully aware that the final chapter of this story would not be written in tears or apologies, but in consequences that would echo long after the truth was finally spoken.